Electronic sound pop-up.
Chicago hustle, Chicago hustle, Chicago hustle, Volcas, Chicago hustle. Hello and welcome. In today's episode, we will deep dive into Chicago house. And to do so, first we must turn back the clock to the year 1985. At this time, disco was more or less dead and synth music was the new thing. But on the underground scene, DJs had already since the late 70s worked on a new sound. So this new sound was less pop-oriented, had a more repetitive sound, was more loop-based and had more focus on drums and deep bass lines. And they called this sound warehouse or simply house. But it took some time for this music style to be accepted and released by record companies. The first one is said to be On and On by Jesse Saunders that was released in 1984. And this paved the way for many other artists in the year 1985. For example, Chippy, Jack Master or Mr. Fingers. And this new sound was called Chicago House. And this was basically influenced by house, disco and electrofunk. Typically the drums on these were still made on the TR-808. The TR-909 was around at the time, but it was way too expensive and had not really gained popularity in the house scene yet. So we will get back more to the TR-909 on the episode on, for example, Deep House or Detroit Techno. For the melody, you would have different synths playing. You would use maybe a Korg Poly 61 or a TB303 or SH101 or basically anything that you could get your hands on at the time that was at an affordable price. Samplers was also beginning to be used, but at this time samplers was extremely rare and expensive, and they could only hold for about like 1 second of samples. So sample had to be quite short, and usually it was more or less only one word, like for example, it's house. But let's start by looking now at the drum beat. So instead of using the TR-808, I will use the Volca beats. And what I will do is, if you remember the episode on electrofunk, I will use the same drum loop and it sounds like this. What I will do now is just to change the kick drum. So now instead I put the kick drum on every fourth step of the sequencer. And by doing so I basically created the foundation for our Chicago house music track. What you did further was more or less to create many different patterns on your drum machine. So what I will do is just to program now a couple of patches on my Korg Volca beats, and we will have that as drum in our Chicago house track. Okay, so now we have our electro-inspired drums for our Chicago house track. Next we will need a cool bass line, and for that I've chosen the Korg Volca bass. I'm thinking something like this. So in order to program that I will first need a beat to play to, and then I use the rec function. Cool, that sounds about right. What I want to do now is also to change to unison mode. I do that by pressing the funk button and M3, and now I get the unison sound for my bass line. And together it will sound like this. Okay, so now we have drums and bass, which are the foundation of our house track. And now what I will do is I would pretend that I was one of the lucky few in 1985 who had access to a sampler. So we'll use the Korg Volca sample, but we will not be able to use the full capacity of the Volca sample yet, because basically the Volca sample is much more powerful than a sampler would have been in 1985. But I will use the Volca sample to add this kick drum and this short hand clap sound. that will, I think, will add so much more punch to the mix and really lift the mix. So I think it's worth to spend a small memory size that I would have had in 1985 on that. And also I will add this vocal sample. Chicago House on Volcas, woo! And I'm going to show you now how I get this vocal sample that I've recorded into my Korg Volca sample. First I will use this software and I will do some auto leveling to make the levels appropriate. And then I will cut it up, so I will cut it up into 3 pieces. And then I will save each of these samples in an individual file. And important here to save it in 32 kilohertz and also in mono. So that's what the Volca sample will like. For me it works if I copy it to this folder on my Android phone. Then I will be able to access it. And then I will use this app for my phone. And then using this app, I will basically click here and then I will open, and then I will click load. And then I will select the sample file I want. And then it will appear here and I will click here. And then I will do the same for the next sample and then for the next sample, and I will store them on number 99, 98 and 96 on my Volca sample. And then to transfer, you will need to connect your phone audio out to the sync in here on the Volca sample. And then it's a really good suggestion to have your mobile phone in flight mode when you do the export, so you don't get someone calling you or you don't get any notifications while you're doing the transfer, then it will not work. And then you click here and the transfer will start. And now I have these samples here in my Volca sample. Chicago House on Volca, woo! And finally I think we'll need some kind of melody element as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play around a little bit with the Volca Keys and see if we can get some kind of happy accident happening. Good, now I think we're on to something and it sounds like this. That I think will fit right into the mix. Now it is finally time to jam. Let's go! Chicago House, Chicago House, Chicago House Volcas, Chicago House, woo! 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 Chicago House Volcas, woo! Chicago House, 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 woo! Chicago House Volcas, 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 woo! Chicago House, 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 Excellent, that concludes our little experiment to make our own Chicago house track using the Korg Volcas. And what happens now is in the 2 years to come after 1985 it will be a really exciting period for electronic dance music. So only in these 2 years we'll see a lot of new sounds developing. We will see the birth of deep house, Detroit techno, acid house, and a lot of these genres that actually has shaped electronic music to what it is today. So that will be really exciting, and the next episode will be deep house. So until next time, ta-ta!